Hello and welcome to Encouraging Others in Loving Jesus. I'm your host, Kim Smith. This is episode 330. Are you guilty of cafeteria-style obedience? I can just about guarantee you have never listened to a podcast with that title. Am I right? If by chance you have, please email me at encouragingotherinlovingjesus@gmail.com because I've got to listen to it. Because I doubt that's the title that you have ever come across, whether it was regarding the passage that we're going to cover for today or any other passage in the Bible. Honestly, I changed the title just a few minutes ago. I really like this one better. The other one was tunnel vision obedience, which either one of them applies to today's storyline, but I think this one applies better to for us to apply. Let's put it that way. So, if you read the Old Testament, there are, and I admit it, as much as I love the Old Testament, which I do, and if you've listened to this podcast ever before, you know that every topic that I've covered so far, from episode 1 to episode 330, has been an overview of the Old Testament. I almost always bring in something from the New Testament, but we have been doing overviews of Joshua, Judges, Ruth, 1st and 2nd Samuel, 1st and 2nd Kings, and that's where we land today in 2 Kings 9, 1 through 36. But I admit, including in our study of Joshua, there are some just gruesome stories. And for me, because of the way my brain and my heart work, they're not overly taxing on me, but I know for some listeners they may be. I have a person in my life who cannot read those type of stories without really internalizing and empathizing with the people to a level that is just not where I go. And today's story, as overwhelming as it can be, there's at least one lesson, but honestly, there's at least two lessons that we can learn from the story of Jehu. So, if you don't know much about the divided kingdom of Israel, which, if you've been listening to this podcast for any time, I surely hope you know something. But nearly everybody who knows anything about the Bible has heard about Ahab and Jezebel. So during the divided kingdom of Israel, Ahab was a king for the northern kingdom, and he married Jezebel, and it didn't go well. Like, they made horrid decisions, and the key phrases, did what was evil in the Lord's sight, and boy, did they do what was evil. And God promised, your kingdom and your family are just going to be totally wiped out. But when we did that lesson, when the promise came, I emphasized the fact that God makes promises and He will fulfill them. But it doesn't mean that He's going to fulfill them next week or in 5 minutes, as we so often want that to happen. But God doesn't forget. And God will fulfill. And today we do see the final installment of that. Last week we saw Jezebel going down, 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 down. And her very, very, very gruesome death. And it's a bit overwhelming. But the thing is, her life had been one evil deed after another, after another, after another. And so many had died, either at her direct order, such as Naboth, or just by her influence. And so God has promised that I'm going to wipe out Ahab's entire family. And He has set up Jehu, this now king of Israel. His assignment was to clean out the family of Ahab. But there's a couple of different lessons to look for in this. Number one, this is not our main focus today, even though the last time I taught this story, it was my main focus. the first thing to look out for is how far out of bounds that Jehu went. So Jehu's job was to kill the lineage of Ahab. That was what he was to do. And he was to clean up the evil. And that means death. We're not just talking like run them out of town. But do notice just how far out of bounds that Jehu went. Like, Jehu took his possibly righteous anger and just allowed that anger or that zest for killing to just go way out of bounds. And we can all fall into that same trap of the fact that we can be passionate about a cause, whether it is eliminating sex trafficking or it is getting rid of abusers in the church. Like, there are so many different areas that can stir up righteous anger, and righteous anger being anger that is something that God, like, we're passionate about something God would be passionate about. But in my opinion, where it overtakes the line from righteous anger to out of control is when that anger controls the person. So they may have a righteous cause, but if that anger takes control over them, it is no longer righteous anger, in my opinion. And I would love to hear your comments. So you can write me in the email again, encouragingothersandlovingjesus@gmail.com. So that's the first thing we're going to see about Jehu. The second thing is, Jehu has this task, and that he does well plus. Like, he definitely does what the Lord commanded him to do. And again, he goes overboard. But what we're going to see in verse 31 is the fact that that's the only thing he obeyed. Like, he got that right, and he skipped all the other ways that the Lord had commanded to obey him. And as a result, instead of being like a raving success, Jehu is, well, definitely not a success and definitely not a model for us. So I will point out verse 31, and then we will come back to that because that'll be our focal verse. And this is a couple of weeks where, you know, a lot of times I go over just a few verses, but in this case, we're covering 36 verses. But we're not spending time on those 36. But if I don't read to you the entirety of the text, like, you really wouldn't understand what's going on. So here we go. We're reading down through, and it is not 2 Kings 9, it's 2 Kings 10. I'm glancing back at 9 because we've spent a few weeks in 9. So it's 2 Kings 10, 1 through 36. And let's hit this. So Jehu kills Ahab's family is the heading for it. And it should be like Jehu kills Ahab's family and everybody who almost has ever known Ahab's family. Because that really is kind of how it works out, because he doesn't stop with Ahab's family. He just continues to go. So here we go. So 2 Kings 10, starting with verse 1. Ahab had 70 sons living in the city of Samaria. So Jehu wrote letters and sent them to Samaria, the elders and the officials of the city, and to the guardians of King Ahab's sons. He said, the king's sons are with you, and you have at your disposal chariots, horses, a fortified city, and weapons. As soon as you receive this letter, select the best qualified of your master's sons to be your king. Prepare to fight for Ahab's dynasty. But they were paralyzed with fear and said, we've seen that 2 kings couldn't stand against this man. What can we do? So the palace and the city administrators, together with the elders and the guardians of the king's sons, sent this message to Jehu. We are your servants and will do anything you tell us. We will not make any one king. Do whatever you think is best." Jehu responded with a second letter. "If you are on my side and are going to obey me, bring the heads of your master's sons to me at Jezreel by this time tomorrow." Now the 70 sons of the king were being cared for by the leaders of Samaria, where they had been raised since childhood. When the letter arrived, the leaders killed all 70 of the king's sons. They placed their heads in baskets and presented them to Jehu at Jezreel. I told you it was gnarly. Just hang on. A messenger went to Jehu and said, "They have brought the heads of the king's sons." So Jehu ordered, "Pile them in 2 heaps at the entrance of the city gate and leave them there until morning." In the morning he went out and spoke to the crowd that had gathered around them. "You are not to blame," he told them. "I am the one who conspired against my master and killed him. But who killed all these? You can be sure that the message of the Lord that was spoken concerning Ahab's family will not fail. The Lord declared through his servant Elijah that this would happen." Then Jehu killed all who were left of Ahab's relatives living in Jezreel, and all his important officials, his personal friends, and his priests. So Ahab was left without a single survivor. Then Jehu set out for Samaria. Along the way, while he was at Betheked of the shepherds, he met some of the relatives of King Ahaziah of Judah. "Who are you?" he asked them. And they replied, "We are relatives of King Ahaziah. We are going to visit the sons of King Ahab and the sons of the queen mother." "Take them alive," Jehu shouted to his men, and they captured all 42 of them and killed them at the well of Beth-eked. None of them escaped. When Jehu left there, he met Jehonadab, son of Rechab, who was going to meet him. After they had greeted each other, Jehu said to him, "Are you as loyal to me as I am to you?" "Yes, I am," Jehonadab replied. "If you are," Jehu said, "then give me your hand." So Jehonadab put out his hand, and Jehu helped him into the chariot. Then Jehu said, "Now come with me, see how devoted I am to the Lord." So Jehonadab rode along with him. When Jehu arrived in Samaria, he killed everyone who was left there from Ahab's family, just as the Lord had promised through Elijah. Now, we're not finished. We're only to verse 18, and Jehu just continues to kill. So it's like he got blood on his hands, and he sadly seemed to like the taste of that, in the fact that this was something that he thought at some point, I think he thought he was doing the right thing, and he was doing what God told him, but it went way overboard. So here we go, verse 18. Then Jehu called a meeting of all the people of the city and said to them, "Ahab's worship of Baal was nothing compared to the way I worship him. Therefore summon all the prophets and the worshipers of Baal, and call together all his priests. See to it that every one of them comes, for I am going to offer a great sacrifice to Baal. Anyone who fails to come will be put to death." But Jehu's cunning plan was to destroy all the worshipers of Baal. Then Jehu ordered, "Prepare a solemn assembly to worship Baal." So they did. He sent messengers throughout all Israel, summoning those who worship Baal. They all came, not a single one remained behind, and they filled the temple of Baal from one end to the other. And Jehu instructed the keeper of the wardrobe, "Be sure that every worshiper of Baal wears one of these robes." So robes were given to them. Then Jehu went into the temple of Baal with Jehonadab, son of Rechab. Jehu said to the worshippers of Baal, "Make sure no one who worships the Lord is here, only those who worship Baal." So they were all inside the temple to offer sacrifices and burnt offerings. Now Jehu had stationed 80 of his men outside the building and warned them, "If you let anyone escape, you will pay for it with your own life." As soon as Jehu had finished sacrificing the burnt offerings, he commanded his guards and officers, "Go in and kill all of them. Don't let a single one escape." So they killed them all with their swords, and the guards and the officers dragged their bodies outside. Then Jehu's men went into the innermost fortress of the temple of Baal. They dragged out the sacred pillar used to worship Baal and burned it. They smashed the sacred pillar and wrecked the temple of Baal, converting it into a public toilet, as it remains to this day. In this way, Jehu destroyed every trace of Baal worship from Israel. He did not, however, destroy the gold calves at Bethel and Dan, with which Jeroboam son of Nebat had caused Israel to sin. Nonetheless, the Lord said to Jehu, "You've done well in following my instructions to destroy the family of Ahab. Therefore, your descendants will be kings of Israel down to the 4th generation." But this is verse 31. So the one thing he accomplished is he wiped out all of Ahab's lineage, and really and truly everybody who was anywhere near close to his lineage, including his spiritual lineage of all that worship Baal. But verse 31 gives us a good glimpse of why I call this cafeteria-style obedience. In other words, he picked what he wanted to do, but he did not obey God in all his ways. Verse 31, but Jehu did not obey the law of the Lord, the God of Israel, with all his heart. He refused to turn from the sins that Jeroboam had led Israel to commit. Last section. At about that time, the Lord began to cut down the size of Israel's territory. King Hazael conquered several sections of the country east of the Jordan, including all of Gilead, Gad, Reuben, and Manasseh. He conquered the area from the town of Aor by the Arnon Gorge to as far north as Gilead and Bashan. The rest of the events in Jehu's reign, everything he did and all his accomplishments, are recorded in the book of the history of the kings of Israel. When Jehu died, he was buried in Samaria. Then his son Jehoahaz became the next king. In all, Jehu reigned over Israel from Samaria for 28 years. So when it comes to his assignment straight from God, Jehu obviously accomplished that and then just kept killing and kept killing. Like, he was wiping out everything that could possibly be. And the part that really drives me is the fact that he got Ahaziah's relatives as well. Ahaziah being the king of Judah. Like, he catches them along the way and he wipes them out. I think he was unhinged. Just me personally. But then when we look in verse 31, I want you to look at that verse. That but verse. But Jehu did not obey the law of the Lord, the God of Israel, with all his heart. He refused to turn from the sins of Jeroboam that Jeroboam had led Israel to commit. So, in my opinion, Jehu is a prime example of cafeteria-style obedience. In other words, he picked what he wanted to obey, and he left off the law of the Lord, like the living day to day for God. He found a purpose. He found a singular purpose, something that he really wanted to do. Oh, I want to wipe out all of Ahab's family, because he may have very well not just been doing it because the Lord said, but so that there was no way that anybody could say that anybody in Ahab's line had any lineage to the throne. We don't know exactly, but like, he definitely cleared out Ahab's line, as well as the Baal worshipers. But he didn't obey the law of the Lord, the God of Israel, with all his heart. And I just wonder, how many times do we do the exact same thing? Because as out of bounds as this story is, and like, we know, like, I could go back up and read what happened to Ahab's sons, and you would remember just how out of bounds this story is. Like, we just can't even imagine this, nor do we ever want to live in a culture where this is what happens. I mean, this is like mafia on steroids, Israel style. But I believe that every last one of us Christ followers have the temptation to have this same type of cafeteria-style obedience. Is that anything ringing with you? Like, our weekly engagement feature is when you listen to the biblical story example of cafeteria-style obedience, did the Spirit convict you regarding your own life? I ask God right now to convict each of us. Dear God, search us, O God, and know our hearts. Test us and know our anxious thoughts. Point out any way in us that offends you. and lead us in the way of everlasting life. Because I know that you may not relate to this, but I relate to this. Right now, at my church, the ladies are doing a season of studies on spiritual disciplines. And there are some that I've never ever thought about. And including this upcoming week in my reading, I know there's one that I never thought of that as a spiritual discipline. But the thing is, what I realize is I have looked at the spiritual disciplines, and some of them I really work very hard at. And others, spiritual disciplines are activities or lack thereof that bring you into a closer relationship with Christ. And some of them I feel more comfortable with, and some of them I feel much less comfortable with. And I am tempted to just try to forget that they exist. Like Bible study and prayer, I'm all about those. And I am so thankful that I am all about those. But there are other activities and or the abstinence from activities such as solitude or fasting that I'm not as good at. And so I want you to prayerfully think about and ask the Lord, am I guilty of this cafeteria-style obedience where I have given you parts of my life and I am all in on those? But when it comes to that part of my heart where I hold unforgiveness toward someone, that's a no-go. Like, that is not, you're not touching that. Does that ring with anybody out there? So, we look at a story of Jehu, and you're just really tempted to skip all over it because it's like, this is just too gruesome, and there's no way that I can learn anything from this. But yet, there is. I am trusting that the Lord is going to prick your heart and mine to areas where we are tempted to pick and choose what we want to obey and what we are not going to obey, or what we're going to try to partially obey. Like what he was guilty of is he did not obey the law of the Lord, the God of Israel, with all his heart. The very first commandment is to love the Lord your God, like him only. He is the only God, the only God. And every last one of us are tempted on the daily to have another little g God, most often ourselves, because we choose our own way. We choose what we want and not what God wants. So we're as guilty as Jehu of not following the law of the Lord with our whole hearts. But then we also literally pick and choose. Well, yeah, I know God's word says this, but I'm going to do this. Or I know God called me to this, but I don't feel comfortable, so I'm going to do this. Or I'm going to, instead of obeying, I'm going to sacrifice in this area, and I'm going to try to do this like bargaining with God that, yeah, I don't want to talk to my neighbor about Jesus, but I will mow their yard. Like, does any of that ring with you? Like, I hope it does, and I'm just trusting that it does. And so, thank you for tuning in, and thank you for, listening. Now, listen to what God is telling each of us. And be willing to share this with others. This podcast remains free for you to listen to and free for you to share with others. All 330 episodes are that way. They're not free for me to record, but they're free for you to listen to and free for you to share. And I really feel like still at this day, that's what God wants me to do, and I'm just continuing to do it. We're going to continue to just walk through God's word, and I want to encourage you in loving Jesus. And I want you to encourage in your walk. I want to encourage you to love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, and love your neighbor as yourself. That's my job. Now, maybe that's your job too. Maybe you're not supposed to get behind a podcast mic, but maybe you're supposed to get on the other end of your smartphone and send a word of encouragement to a friend, or share maybe today's episode with them and say, hey, this is one gnarly story from the Old Testament, but as crazy as it sounds, there's a lesson in it for you and for me. And just see what God does. We continue to walk through the divided kingdom, and there are days where it's some ugly stuff, but the Lord can use even some of the most evil people, including Queen Athaliah, which is next up on our agenda, to teach us. Like, we don't have to just learn from people who made right decisions, because none of us make the right decisions every day. We can learn from people who go down a wrong road and see the sign that says absolutely not, do not go this way. We can learn from those too. And so that's where we're going next week. Queen Athaliah, yeah, she's a pickle. Just like so many during that time period. And so come join us again next week for that. You can go to the very bottom and you can get the QR code and get to all 330 episodes. Not all 330 are on all the podcast platforms, but on my Podbean site, they are. I finally noticed that I hadn't changed from Twitter to X in my resources section. I mean, I know that it's X. I use it every morning to share Bible verses on, but I just had never changed it in the show notes, and so it's changed finally. We've got our Instagram down there, and we also have the link to our Encouraging Others and Loving Jesus Facebook group. So there's multiple directions where you can go to see, especially encouraging Bible verses and or the sharing of the episodes as they come out each week. So thank you so much for tuning in. And just remember, it's always a trust and obey kind of day.